This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
When you think about it, when you're speaking into that phone and you're in a private space, I mean, no one ever hears it except the person on the other side, right? So that's so gratifying, because there are things that people want to say in grief that maybe they didn't say to their person, or maybe they're angry, or maybe they're heartbroken all over how something they did say, that now they can pick up that phone and they can correct it. They could say, I was angry. That last conversation we had, I didn't mean it.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. I'm talking with Amy Dawson today about wind phones, where the wind will take your words to those you love who have walked ahead. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
This episode is sponsored by International Doula Life Movement. International Doula Life Movement proudly presents their free online birthday bash from January 8 to January 12, 2024. The birthday bash is IDLM's gift to the doula community. This is an opportunity to connect with like-minded professionals, exchange ideas, and build lasting relationships that will elevate your death doula practice. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity. Register now at internationaldoulalifemovement.com/classes. And remember, it's free.
Today's topic and this guest is a topic and a person that I've wanted to have on for several years. I'm talking with Amy Dawson about wind phones today. Something unusual. We haven't talked about this before on the podcast. I think you're really, really going to like this conversation. Amy is a certified special needs coach and a master grief coach. She describes herself as the mother of 3 children, 2 here on earth and 1 in heaven. She manages the My Wind Phone website, mapping wind phone locations all over the world and all over the U.S., and connecting people who are grieving with resources that support them in their grief journey. So in our conversation, you're going to hear Amy share how the wind phone concept began and what motivated her to start My Wind Phone. So she didn't originate wind phones. So you'll hear that story. Just to give you a little background, a wind phone is a place where those who are grieving can connect with their loved ones who have died, letting their words be carried through the wind on an actual telephone that's not connected to any earthly connection. Amy tracks the locations of wind phones all over the world. They're designed to offer grievers an opportunity to send personal messages to their loved ones, give them a chance to say what they didn't say or what they want to say to their loved ones. And it's not just expressing grief over the death of someone that they care about. It's all the different forms that grief takes as well. Loss of identity or hope or relationships, safety and security. It's a wind phone is a place for people to express their grief, no matter where it comes from, and express it privately. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Amy Dawson of My Wind Phone. Amy, welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks for having me.
It's so great to talk with you. I'm really excited about our conversation today because I have sort of been aware of wind phones for several years and very interested in the concept. So I love that we're going to take a deep dive into that today. It's going to be so good.
I appreciate too you helping spread the word of them.
I love it. Okay, so we're going to start with just an icebreaker question so we can get to know each other and my listeners can get to know you a little bit. So this is a question I did not send you. I always like that part to
All
throw
right,
that
go.
in. Okay, what was your favorite TV show growing up?
Happy Days. I was going to marry Henry Winkler. Do you remember the Fonz?
Yes, he's classic.
See, I didn't even have to hesitate on that.
You wanted to marry him, though?
Oh, yeah. Not now. I mean, I don't know if you've seen Henry lately, but
He has aged, okay, as we all
we
have,
all have.
right?
Yeah,
But yeah,
I loved that show.
what was it about the Fonz that you found so appealing?
I don't know. He was just so cool. I don't know. It was just a fun show. I think back, well, when I was a kid, in the 70s, I don't know, everything was 30 minutes. Remember? You had to wait up and see it or you missed it.
Right. And there were commercials.
Yeah, I think it was just the whole experience. I don't know. They just seemed like such a fun family.
And they were always able to resolve the problem that started out within 30 minutes.
Exactly. And Fonzie had a very cool girlfriend. Her name was Pinky Tuscadero.
I remember that. She had a mullet.
Yeah, and she wore pink leather. I thought that was the coolest.
That's hilarious. And wasn't she was a rock singer.
Something like that, yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh,
I just thought it was a really cool show. What was yours?
Oh, what was mine? I don't know.
But Helen, you asked the question. You must know.
I would say probably the Brady Bunch.
Why?
That was a big one. I don't know. The hair and the clothes were so very 70s.
They were.
Yeah, and it was the typical teenage angst, Marsha. It was the typical middle sister issues that Jan went through, and Marsha getting her nose broken. I know way too much about this stuff. See, this is very, very useless information that's stored in my brain that I probably need to let go of.
I love it. I think Greg Brady just turned like 70 or something last week, I heard.
Do not tell me that. That is
Something
so
like
sad.
that.
I guess I was much younger, and my assumption was that because he played a teenager in the show that he was a teenager, but he probably was older than that.
Maybe. And I think, too, we saw reruns a lot. So it might have been that we've even saw them later on after. So they were even older.
That's true.
Reruns were a big thing.
That's really sad that Greg Brady is 70. Wow. That makes me feel really old.
I know it was just his birthday.
Wow. Well, I'm glad we're talking about all the important things today.
I know, right?
I started it, so I'll take the responsibility. But we do have a wonderful topic today that's something we have never talked about on the podcast before. I've never had a guest that discussed this with me, so I'm so excited to dig into this. Wind phones. Tell me the story of wind phones and how they came into being.
Sure. Well, it's actually a very interesting and beautiful story. There's a Japanese gardener. His name is Hitaru Sasaki, and he lives obviously in Japan. And in 2010, his cousin died, and he was very close with his cousin, and it was really earth-shattering to him when his cousin passed away. And he built a wind phone. Well, he took an old-fashioned phone booth. It's gorgeous, and if you go on my website, you'll see pictures. But it's white with beautiful glass. It overlooks a gorgeous garden. It has been moved once. But he took this beautiful phone booth. He put a rotary phone in it. It's not connected to anything, so it was not hooked up to like a phone line. It was hooked up to the wind. And every day he'd go in his garden and he'd talk to his cousin who died. And it helped him with his grief. And it really was a very healing thing. And in Japan, they very much believe in the transformation of a relationship when someone dies, so that they're not just gone, that they really believe in continuing their bond with the person that went on ahead. So changing the relationship. And that's what he did. I mean, he maintained his relationship with his cousin. And then what ended up happening was in 2011, they had a tsunami, you may remember, in Japan. Yes. And it was the worst, terrible. 3 times more people were killed in that tsunami than in 9/11. And in the town specific to him, and I always struggle with the Japanese names. So I'm going to like make Atsuchi is the name of the town, but I always have to stop and think about it because,
Yeah, that's a difficult one.
but there was more than 2,500 missing people in his town. So what ended up happening was he opened his wind phone to the public, and people made a pilgrimage to go all the way to his town to say goodbye to maybe the people that they lost in the tsunami. And the tsunami came up and it just washed people away. It killed people. People weren't found. It was horrifying and devastating. And it's been known as one of the world's greatest sites of resilience, the wind phone in Japan that he created. And over 30,000 people have made the journey there to that wind phone. It's also called, in Japanese, kaze no denwa, telephone of the wind.
Telephone of the wind.
So he is the original person that created the first wind phone that really everyone needs to thank and give credit for, because his beautiful, he has such a giving heart, and opening it up to the world and allowing people to have this dedicated space for grief. And then for all of us to kind of join in with him on sharing wind phones across the world. I mean, we have them all over the United States, but all over the world, there are wind phones. But it all began there. And it really is a beautiful story. And anyone that's listening that might like to read it, look about it more in further detail, you go to the website and look. There's just so much more to it.
That's incredible. The first thing that strikes me when you tell that story is I'm worried that some of my listeners are now Googling, what is a rotary phone?
Yes,
because they don't know what that is. A rotary phone, for those young people who might be listening, a rotary phone, you actually had to turn a dial. There was a hole for each number, and you actually would rotate the dial around, and then it would click back into place. And you did that for each of the numbers that you needed to dial. Yeah, there's so much to unpack in this story. He did this on his own, a Japanese concept of continuing this relationship. So what he was doing was finding a different way to communicate in the way that the relationship was after his cousin died.
Yes. And really, a wind phone is so much, it represents hope and something more, that our person can still hear us and is still right with us as we move forward in our life. And I say move forward, not move on. We move forward and bringing our person with us, which I think is so healing and has really helped me personally as far as kind of changing my my perspective of death.
It's a very interesting concept. So you started tracking the wind phones or mapping the wind phones here in the United States. What motivated you to start doing that?
Well, I also too, Helen, I track them all over the world. I have people that write to me from all over. Lithuania.
Oh, wow.
Was one of the farthest. So my daughter, Emily, passed away in April 2nd of 2020. And she really inspired me to do this. Because when she died, and if you remember, it was the beginning of COVID, and she did not die from COVID. She had a terminal illness that she fought for 3 years. But when she died, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stop being her mom. So I had read about wind phones the year before. And I'm sure your listeners will understand this, but when someone that's so important in your life dies, there's so much you don't remember of the first year and a half or so. You're just kind of functioning. So like pinpoint why I started it, I'm not really sure, except that it just felt right. It felt like the way I could keep Emily with me. And I still to this day feel like Emily and I work on this together. This is a project that we do together. At the time when I started this, I really needed to keep Emily and my relationship strong and bonded and continuing. And I picture that I'm doing this on Earth and Emily is answering the phone up in the wind and saying to like somebody's mom, hey, Sherry, your son Joe, he's on the phone, pick it up. I just can picture her doing that. And so that gives me great satisfaction and joy in doing this end of it and making sure I connect people. And then later on, a year or so into it, I started thinking about how rewarding this has been. And then also I started thinking about Emily, and she always dreamed of being known. Emily didn't have many friends. She was a young woman with special needs. You know how kids can be, very unkind. And she really had her sister, her brother, me, my husband, as her friends. You know, her sister and her brother were her best friends her whole life. And as that got older, that changed for her. But she started modeling. She was in a music video. She did a whole lot of cool things. She went to schools and talked to young children about bullying and kindness when she was in a transition program after high school. And so I think I'm actually keeping Emily's dream alive in a way of wanting to be known, because I think for so long that she felt unknown by her peers. And so I think that for me, a lot of this is keeping my bond with her and showing her, you're known. We're going to never stop saying your name.
So do you have a personal wind phone for yourself? Is that how you got started?
Yes, I do. I have a little blue wind phone, and it's in Emily's room.
Oh.
That's the way I started. And, when you look at the map of wind phones, they're all over the world. However, there are so many private wind phones. So I think that's really important to say, too, that if someone's uncomfortable going somewhere to a wind phone or doesn't have one near them, they certainly can recreate that for themselves.
Yeah, you can make your own personal wind phone, and it doesn't have to be outside. I think my first impression of it was, it's a wind phone. It would have to be outside in your yard or a garden or a park somewhere out in nature, but you can have it inside your own home.
Absolutely. And I think that when we think of the wind, sometimes people will say, well, just like you need to have the wind. And that's symbolic, right? And it's also symbolic. Using the wind as a messenger isn't anything new. It's between like linking our world to the afterlife. It's not a new idea. Greek mythology did that. The gods used to send messages on the wind. So that's not really like a new concept. That's something that has been around for a very long time. But like you said, whomever is doing it creates the environment that works for them. It's different for everyone.
Well, and that's absolutely true. And what better way to personalize it? Because we know grief is universal. Everybody grieves, but everybody has their own style of grieving, is what I call it. So each person has very individualized grief needs. And for that first year and a half, I've heard people call it a mist or a fog.
Yes.
So to be able to navigate your way through that mist and that fog without really knowing where you're going or what you need, only knowing that the loss is so great, having a way to communicate that's private and discreet. You could scream, you can talk to them, you can tell them what you're feeling, you can say what I'm doing, how much I miss you, any of the things that you need to say privately.
Exactly.
If you have it somewhere in your home or in your own yard, even.
And I think it's important to mention, too, when I speak of wind phones, I speak more about bereavement, because that's my personal journey of having my daughter die. However, people do visit wind phones for other reasons other than loss through death. It could be the loss of a job. It could be the loss of a dream, the loss of trust. People have visited when they've gone through relationship changes, divorces, the loss of hope. So it's not just when people die, although that is, I think, the way I speak of it most, because that's my personal journey. But I think it's very important to mention that it could be any loss.
That's true. Grief is generated from a loss of so many different things.
Yes.
Yes, I love that idea, to speak that into the wind and let the wind carry it.
Yes.
And for each person, whatever that destination of the message might be, can be different.
It's very therapeutic. Picking up the phone. Now, some wind phones don't have a rotary phone. Some rotary phones are getting very difficult to find.
Yeah, that's a really old thing.
Yeah. So some have other phones. Rotary phones, you mentioned earlier, but they stopped being made at the end of the 1960s. And so they are quite old and quite hard to find now. But so there are other phones. I mean, that shouldn't limit someone as well if they're looking to make one or create one. But there's something about picking up the phone. I think we can all remember picking up the phone and dialing someone's phone number.
At least people our age can remember that.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and then there's something about it, listening to the phone click back and actually making that connection. Something we do so regularly every day is call our person. To call our person when they have gone ahead is very therapeutic to many. I mean, I think I'd like to also just add in there, like it's been therapeutic for me. It's wonderful for so many people, but it also isn't for everyone, right? So I think that we just need to give the understanding that it's another grief tool that has been very helpful for me personally and for so many others. But there are people that maybe wouldn't find the same comfort in it that, for example, I have.
Right. Yeah, what you were saying about remembering phone numbers, certain phone numbers really resonates. So my grandmother died in 2000. She's been gone a long time. And I can still tell you, because I grew up in that house, and when I left there, she lived in that house until she died. I can tell you what that phone number was. And I remember picking up and hearing a dial tone. I don't know that my kids have ever heard a dial tone.
That's true.
Yeah. My mom, when she got her first cell phone, she told me it's broken. And I said, what's the matter with it? You just got it. And she said, there's no dial tone. It's dead. And I'm like, oh, Ma, there's no dial tone because there is no dial tone.
Right.
Those things are very entrenched in memory. I totally get that. And I think that the muscle memory of either punching in, on I don't even know what kind of phone you call that. It's not rotary.
Push number.
Just pushing the numbers or dialing. There's some muscle memory there for those of us who used to use that type of phone.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's part of the experience.
It really is. There's an expression out there, and I'm not going to be able to reiterate it exactly, but it's something like when the phones were hung on the wall, we were free. Because you didn't always have a phone in your pocket you had to answer, right? You had to actually make a specific reason to sit down and call somebody or answer that phone, was not just because you were always accessible.
So when you talk about the wind phones and how they're not actually connected to anything, that's incredibly freeing.
Yes.
Whatever you need to say or want to say into that phone, it can go wherever you want it to go. It's limitless.
In addition to that, too, when you think about it, when you're speaking into that phone and you're in a private space, I mean, no one ever hears it except the person on the other side, right? So that's so gratifying, because there are things that people want to say in grief that maybe they didn't say to their person, or maybe they're angry, or maybe they're heartbroken over how something they did say, that now they can pick up that phone and they can correct it. They could say, I was angry. That last conversation we had, I didn't mean it.
Right.
And being able to dial their number and say that can bring someone forward through the grief and take all of the maybe sadness, guilt, whatever they may feel, and allow them to find a place for that, find a way to resolve that and to settle it down inside of them so that they can continue their relationship with their person and know that they've said what they needed to say.
This episode is sponsored by International Doula Life Movement. International Doula Life Movement proudly presents their online birthday bash from January the 8th to January 12th, 2024. And the best part? It's absolutely free. Join International Doula Life Movement for 5 days of inspiration, education, and celebration. This virtual event brings together nurses, doulas, and authors specializing in end-of-life care for an unforgettable experience. You'll be diving into intensive training sessions led by experienced nurses, renowned death doulas, and best-selling authors. Learn the latest in death doula practices, discover new techniques, and expand your skill set. The Birthday Bash is IDLM's gift to the doula community. This is an opportunity to connect with like-minded professionals, exchange ideas, and build lasting relationships that will elevate your death doula practice. This is your chance to learn from the best in the business. Explore the many facets of death doula work, whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting your journey. Uncover the various roles death doulas play and discover the unique contributions each type brings to the end-of-life experience. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity to celebrate International Death Doula Life Movement's online birthday bash, January the 8th to January 12th, 2024. And remember, it's free. Register now at internationaldoulalifemovement.com/classes.
I wonder if there's a space for anger in this, Amy, because a lot of times things are said from both sides. And
Yes.
because of the restraint of the guilt or whatever, obligation or relationship, respect, things don't come from the caregiver or the survivor that maybe they did want to say in anger.
I had an email from a mom, and it's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Her son died from an overdose, but at the same time, so did one of his friends. And the mom was just so angry because it had come out that her son had provided the drugs that took both of their lives. And she was mad. But she wasn't just mad at him because he died and he had made this decision and that, affected all of them forever. But she was mad that, and she didn't want to express it to anybody. She was blaming him for the death of his friend. I can understand that, right? And her feelings. And she went to the wind phone and she said she screamed and yelled at him and she cried. And she also called his friend and apologized. And she felt that helped her. She felt that it helped her get it out because she didn't feel she could say it to her other children or her spouse. She didn't want to put those words out there that she was blaming him, but she was feeling it. And so then she could share that in this private space and it helped her.
It's kind of like an offloading because things like that, emotions like that, and memories like that are very heavy.
Yes.
Very heavy and oppressively so. So to be able to offload that into a wind phone, to hand it off, and the wind is weightless and it lifts it and carries it for you, is that freeing? And does it relieve some of that grief burden or that anger somehow?
Yeah, I believe it does. And, just being able to pick up the phone and share what happened today or tomorrow, or, and keep our person with us, keep that communication line open. Now, I think most of us talk to someone that passed away probably every day anyway, without the wind phone, right? I mean, I talk to my daughter constantly. I just think the wind phone is a beautiful way of, it's almost like, it's a whole, I want to say this, it's kind of a whole way of, it's special. You're going to find that wind phone and you're going to go to it, whether you're going to hike through the woods to find this one or whether you're going to a park or wherever you're going. But it's more of an event, more of a planned, I guess, event. I'm not quite sure how to say that otherwise.
No, I see what you're saying. It's intentional. And
yes.
To me, when I think about the wind phones, and I've looked at your website and I've seen the photographs that are there, it's a little box of a sacred space. It's momentary and it's there. It's just a place in the woods against a tree or a fence or a building or whatever until you step up to it. And you hand off those emotions and those thoughts and memories, whatever it is that you want to say. And for a moment, it is a sacred space.
Yes. And we don't have really designated places to grieve. I mean, maybe various religions, maybe their churches or things like that, but this is a place where anyone can go and feel their grief and express their grief without judgment.
Yes.
And start to begin to pick up the pieces of themselves.
Yeah.
Because grief is a process and a journey. And I think maybe even though we will all experience grief, it's so misunderstood that you will grieve the rest of your life. Now, the way in which you grieve the rest of your life will be up to you. But this is one way that you can help your grieving process, your grieving journey, if it's right for you.
And what a beautiful way to do it with all the symbolism. And I get what you're saying. There are places we can go to do that are designed intentionally for that. But when you think about organized religion, for a lot of people, that is abhorrent. It's oppressive, maybe even triggering based on what their history has been in their lifetime, and they don't feel safe in a building or within an organization of organized religion, and not comfortable enough to voice some of these more complicated grief emotions, the hate, and being able to apologize to your son's friend about the fact that your son, who also died, furnished this other person with drugs that took his life. Those are very complicated emotions, and not what I would call, if I had to label it, proper grief emotions. Yeah, what society says are appropriate. It's appropriate to feel sad.
And grief is so judged.
But we don't really want to go further. Yeah, grief.
Everyone judges grief. I remember very early on, Facebook will share memories, and memories come up, from 10 years ago. Yeah. And I shared a memory very early on after Emily died. I got a private message from someone that I had known. Are you okay? Like, why are you sharing? Like, very judgmental. I share about my living children. Why would I not share about my child that died? Yeah. And so people, I feel like, in their uncomfortableness in dealing with others' grief, or maybe their lack of understanding because they haven't experienced it yet to that magnitude, judge. And so having a place to go where there is no judgment is amazing.
Yeah. And I love it that when you toss that message out there, when you release it, is the way I think of it. You're releasing it into the wind. It can even be like a prayer, because if you want to just release things to sort of your higher power out into the world, into something bigger than who you are.
Yes.
That's okay too. And the wind phone is that conduit for that.
Mm-hmm. And there's hope of something more. When you hang up that phone, you're like, okay. And there's a good quote. It's like, faith is believing, but not seeing. But when you believe, then you do see. And so maybe it's just like giving you that hope to believe that there's more, and that you'll be with your person again. And that maybe, for this small time being, you're separated physically, but you're not separated, spiritually, emotionally. Right. They're still within you and part of your life.
Well, and that's what grief is, following the loss of somebody you love. You're still connected. I have grown to really dislike the word closure. I don't think that's a thing. I think there may be completion in some forms, but I'm like you. I think you move through your grief for the rest of your life. The loss doesn't undo. You don't get to year 2 and the loss doesn't matter anymore. It still was an event in your life. So you continue to move forward with those grief emotions.
Well, and I think that if we could reframe death as a physical loss. Yes?
Yes.
We have to reframe it. It's a physical absence, but they're not lost from our life.
Exactly.
And I think that's really important to me, because I don't feel like Emily is a loss. When someone says, I'm sorry for your loss, it's very kind of them to say, and I appreciate that. But then I also, in my head, think, I haven't lost her. I know where she is. In my heart, I personally know where she is. Yes. She's physically lost, right? Physically, she's not with me, but she's not lost.
Yeah. She's physically separated from you.
Yeah, for the time being.
Yeah. That's an amazing way of thinking about it. So let's talk about where the phones are and how people can find them. What kind of places are you hearing about people putting their wind phones?
It's so exciting. So I did write down some numbers as of today, which is October 14, 2023. There's 163 that I have mapped on the phone, with 6 more coming soon. Oh, wow. So that is at 169 if we add the coming soons. They're all over. If we talk about just kind of in general, trails. Now, Mr. Sasaki said something I think that is very important. You can't just put a wind phone anywhere and expect it to be healing, right? Nature is very healing. And so that's why you'll find when you track them that so many of them are on trails next to the ocean, on a lake, beautiful sites where people maybe even just need to walk into a trail 5 minutes and they will come across this wind phone, often just hung on a tree. Very simple. There are some very simple ones, as well as there are some that are a little more ornate, a little more, involved, phone booths and that kind of thing. But we're finding them everywhere. So cemeteries have beautiful, so many of them have beautiful sites, right? With lovely winding roads to the different areas of the cemeteries. Mm-hmm. Many are popping up in cemeteries. We have many trails and parks. When we had spoke earlier about hospice, there are many located around hospice centers.
Oh.
Many. I think I counted 14 at the moment.
Nice.
Which is such a beautiful and special place, because not only does your person, if they die when they're in hospice, maybe you go back there and you feel like that's the last place you were physically with them. And wouldn't that be a wonderful place to have that conversation?
Yeah, there's a connection there.
Absolutely. Hospitals are putting some wind phones in. There are a school for special needs just put one in. A friend of mine installed one last week in Georgia at a school for special needs for medically fragile children. The children most likely will die before their families. And so it gives their families a place to go back, a place where the child felt, they were in school there. It was their spot. It was where they belonged. It was, they had the support of the staff and everything. That's a beautiful place. Emily has an aunt who is a camp director. There's one going in a camp for special needs. Emily had special needs in Vermont. And so they are popping up in camps around too for children. And that's so important that we're teaching children about grief and how to grieve and what grief looks like and tools to help them with their grief throughout their whole life. So there's more of those popping up. There's a really cool one in Canada, and a dog. It's for people that lost their dogs. It's so cool. And the wind phone is absolutely beautiful. The picture of it when you see it, but it's at actually a place where they do pet funerals. Oh,
that's so cool.
Yeah. Hyde Park, Vermont brought the first wind phone that I have been able to track to a library. So It's right there on the library grounds, which is wonderful. There was one in a college campus in Santa Clara, California. So colleges are starting to also feel the need to make sure that they're allowing their students to express their grief. And that's the other really amazing thing about wind phones that really makes me thrilled, is that we're bringing grief forward and saying, let's talk about it. It doesn't have to be something that we push away. Like, let's make everybody aware of grief and how we can all help each other. So it's not just the person that's grieving and helping them with their journey, but helping others help the people that they love who are grieving.
So do you think there's been an uptick in how many wind phones are being created since the pandemic started?
Yes, that's what my research has shown.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of wind phones aren't even, so I have the website and I've located those, right? But there's so many. I mean, every day I'll get an email saying, I just walked by one. Here's a picture. Like, here's the coordinates. I don't know who put it there. So there's so many that are out there that we don't even know about, right? Because people just place them, and that was, didn't register when they don't need to, right? So
right.
That's amazing. And I do believe that COVID has helped us bring awareness to the process of grief and to helping those in grief. And so now this concept of a wind phone has grown with that. I mean, and then you think about it during COVID, and Emily died, as I said, during COVID, that, you didn't have funerals. You didn't have people helping you with your grief. You didn't have neighbors coming over and bringing food.
Right.
It changed grief, and it changed how we grieved, and it changed how we process, I think, a lot. I just think it changed. It changed grief, I think in so many positive ways.
I think it changed our dialogue around it as well. We became more aware. I know those of us in the healthcare community, definitely anybody who worked in the end-of-life industry, in medical care, people who worked with counseling and therapists, grief counselors became very aware, and the dialogue was much heightened because everybody was grieving. You didn't have to have someone that you lost you didn't have to have someone who died during COVID or from COVID to be able to feel that loss.
You're right. So I was a teacher for years and years, 33 years. And I used to, as a reading specialist, and I used to teach my students very mindfully all the time about metacognition. And I don't know if you've heard that term, but metacognition is thinking about how you think. So I'm sure sometimes you might stop and say, okay, what am I thinking about? How do I feel? You say it inside of your brain when you're thinking.
Sure.
I think our grief cognition has grown from COVID. I think that our grief cognition is saying, how is it that I'm grieving? What are ways I can do to help myself grieve? So I think grief cognition has absolutely come more to the forefront when we're talking about grief.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I think of that, I will tell people as sort of an example, and you can tell me if I'm heading in the right direction. What are they trying to tell you that they're unable to say?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times I think grief manifests in other ways. Again, we talked about it, the anger, guilt, regret, frustration, all of that. So what are you trying to say that you're not able to vocalize, that you're not able to verbalize? And I think grief is like that. I think it's invasive in a lot of in a lot of our responses and what we say and what we do, but we don't identify it as grief, as a grief emotion.
I agree with you. And grief changes you. It definitely changes the way you think. It changes the way you approach various things. Maybe people that are grieving don't realize it has changed them, but at some point, in some way, it changes everyone when somebody that you love so much dies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to get a little personal with you. Do you still have the blue wind phone in the house?
I absolutely do. And I had also placed one on a trail for Emily. It was taken down. So I always tell people if it was my error in not asking permission for that wind phone. Mm. And I haven't been able to get it back from the trail. Sadly, that was very sad for me. And so I always am saying to people, you know what, better to try to get permission. I thought it was a place that would be okay, but always better to get permission. There's another wind phone that's going to be placed for Emily locally. I still have my private wind phone, and I visit the one in Princeton, New Jersey, which is very near where I live. They have it on the Princeton College campus.
Oh, wow.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
So let's talk about what the wind phones actually look like. Do you have to have a sign or a booth or a cover to indicate what it's for?
No. Cool thing is you don't have to have anything. It can be anything you dream of. It can be anything that resonates with you. There's a lady who told me, just emailed, she's creating one in Arizona. It's a Mickey Mouse phone.
A Mickey Mouse phone.
It was, because she's creating it in memory of her younger child and loved Mickey Mouse. And I don't know if you remember the old Mickey Mouse phones that had like the little receiver, you pick it up. And, Mickey was holding the handset in one hand.
I remember that.
Yeah. So it can be anything the person that creates it would like it to be. There's just no right or wrong way. So whatever feels right for you is exactly how you should create it or can create it. There are things maybe to take into consideration. On the website, I have a page about creating them with some ideas and thoughts. So if it's going to be outside in the elements, you might want a little roof over it. You might not. Some people just put it on the tree with no sign. Some people really put a lot of information on their sign. It's whatever feels right for the person that's creating it.
If it's one that's done in memory of someone they cared about who's died, do they put any sort of memoriam thing on their sign?
Yeah. There are several like that will say, and I have that on the website under the description of the wind phone. If I know it's dedicated to someone, then I'll add that there as well. But yes, absolutely. Say in memory of or inspired by, in honor of. Lots of wind phones have that. And that's a beautiful way of sharing your person in continuing to involve them in your life is to keep saying their name, right?
I love that. That's wonderful. Okay, so how can people use your website to find a wind phone that's close to them?
Okay, so at www.mywindphone.com, there's a page called Locate. Okay, there's a button on the homepage that you can hit, or you can just go to the page. And there you can either do it a few ways. You can type in on the search bar the state that you're looking for, and then it's set so that it will come up to the area that your IP address is registering. Or you can just search by state, or you can go and move the map around with your fingers and zoom in on the various states, and you'll see the different pins as to where they are that way. We also have some people that maybe technology isn't their best friend, right?
Right.
We all know people that, right? And you can send me an email, message me on Facebook. We have a Facebook group, My Wind Phone, several hundred members, or on Instagram. I'll help you find one near you. I answer every message, every phone call, I might take me a day, but I always answer.
Wonderful.
I never want anybody to feel like they're alone in this journey. You're not alone.
Amy, what's your email for people to contact you if they're looking for a wind phone?
hello@mywindphone.com.
Okay. I'll put it in the show notes to make sure that people can get to it. Amy, tell me again what your website is.
www.mywindphone.com.
mywindphone.com. Amy, you're doing wonderful stuff. And I don't know, there's something about the lightness and breeziness. It's hard to describe about being able to speak your grief into the wind like that. Thank you for sharing all of this with all of us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved it. And I think I just want to make sure that I say, this is my way of keeping Emily with me forever.
That's wonderful. I love it that you get to hold her close still.
Thank you.
So maybe now you're in love with wind phones as much as I am. So if you want to find out more information about wind phones, you can go to mywindphone.com. You're going to find information there about the original wind phone that was created in Japan. You're going to find information about how to make a wind phone for yourself and tips and guidelines on where to put them, how to make it successful, and all the little lessons I think that Amy's learned about wind phones. And you can map your area and find where the nearest wind phone is so that you could maybe go make a visit there if you're interested in doing that. So check out mywindphone.com. Please be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.